Welcome back to The Explainer. So, I want you to picture something with me. Imagine you're standing in an infinite cyber desert, just a sprawling biopunk wasteland where absolute chaos is the rule. Yet, somehow, against all odds, within this vast, unpredictable expanse, here we are. We're conscious, we're structured, and we're alive. Today, we're going to dive right into this exact mystery by following the incredible philosophical journey of two figures, Salem and Jasas. We're going to follow them as they navigate the shifting sands of reality to figure out exactly how complex life arises from absolute, utter chaos.
You know, the legendary scholar of myth, Joseph Campbell, really hit the nail on the head when he described this kind of transient reality. He wrote, "The forms that come and go, and of which your body is but one, are the flashes of my dancing limbs." It's such a wild image, right? Our journey through time is this rich, mysterious cavalcade. In the grand, massive timeline of the cosmos, human beings are kind of like cosmic fireflies. We just flash briefly, traveling alongside stars, supernovas, and all these living creatures, before the cavalcade eventually just moves on without us. But within that brief flash of existence, something absolutely miraculous happens.
And that leads Salem, Jasas, and, well, all of us to a really massive brain-bending question. How does a universe actually bootstrap itself into existence? Think about it. To bootstrap literally means to pull yourself up into the air by your own boots, which is physically impossible, right? You need leverage. So in that exact same way, how does our universe, starting from nothing but scattered energy and basic particles, find the leverage to build itself up? How do perfectly ordered, complex structures, like the literal brain you're using to listen to me right now, emerge out of absolute cosmic chaos?
Let's get into Section 1, the Illusion of Stasis.
Okay, so to answer how the universe builds all this complexity, we actually have to unlearn something first. We need to completely dismantle this ancient philosophical assumption that perfection somehow means standing perfectly still. On one side, we have this old Greek inheritance. Aristotle defined divine perfection as the unmoved first mover. It's the state of totally static, silent contemplation where any kind of change is actually seen as a flaw. But as Salem and Jasas realize out there in the cyber desert, there's a totally different way of looking at it, proposed by thinkers like the Islamic scholar Ibn Taymiyyah. He argued for dynamic perfection. The idea here is that perfection isn't some cold, static marble statue. It's a living, biopunk-esque growth. Existence is a continuous, actively growing series of events. It is a dynamic summit, not just a static, unmoving block.
Moving on to Section 2, Entropy against Structure.
So if the universe is hardwired for dynamic growth and action, what's trying to stop it? Well, let's pivot from philosophy over to physics to introduce the biggest threat to this dynamic perfection: entropy. The physicist Erwin Schrödinger defined entropy as the fundamental law of physics dictating the unavoidable tendency of all things to approach a chaotic state. Basically, without active intervention, the universe naturally decays. Entropy is literally the ultimate cosmic eraser. It's that infinite cyber desert constantly trying to swallow up the biopunk oasis, threatening to just dissolve every bit of structure back into a random, messy ocean of energy.
To put that into perspective, imagine throwing a literal bomb into a construction site full of bricks, mortar, and wires. When the dust clears, what are the odds you're going to find a fully wired finished apartment building? Statistically, 0. You're just going to get smaller, dustier bricks. The vast majority of arrangements in the universe are unstructured and random. So how on earth do we actually get the apartment buildings of existence, like planets, biological cells, and complex human societies?
Which brings us to Section 3, the Barzak Principle.
To explain how the universe actually wins this fight against entropy and builds incredible complexity, we find this really powerful alternative framework called the Barzak. The Barzak is an emergent, interactive third state. It happens when two distinct opposing poles, let's say materialism and spirituality, collide but without destroying either of them. It's not just a middle ground. It's a living, dynamic interaction that generates a completely new reality. Think of it as the ultimate bridge that allows opposing forces to synergize into something vastly more complex than the sum of its parts.
And it is absolutely fascinating to watch how this synergizes across the entire fabric of reality, building rapid momentum as it goes. Down at the base level, we have the atom, which is a Barzak between positive protons and negative electrons. Move up to the cell, organic matter interacting with vital energy and perpetual metabolism. Then up to the human being, this profound interaction of physical body and spirit that produces full consciousness. Accelerating further to society, balancing the individual with the community. And finally, the cosmos itself, the grand balance of matter and energy. At literally every single scale, the dynamic Barzak principle bootstraps existence. It uses those opposing poles to climb higher and higher, fighting against the heavy drag of entropy.
And human history rapidly accelerates this complexity. It acts as what we can call a great snowball of humanity. Based on thresholds of collective learning, we see human societies navigate what is known as the wave of nations. Just look at the timeline. 500 years ago, isolated world zones finally linked together. You can think of this era as being driven by the master trader, skillfully navigating these global exchange networks to build complexity and wealth out of completely disparate lands. Then 200 years ago, the fossil fuels revolution gave us a massive energy bonanza. 50 years ago, we hit the Great Acceleration. And looking maybe 100 years into the future, we're facing the massive challenge of building a sustainable world order. We operate exactly like a snowball rolling downhill, constantly gathering momentum and information.
Let's look at Section 4, Civilizations as Living Organisms.
Zooming into the macroscopic level of human beings, how do our societies actually organize themselves to manage all these chaotic forces of nature? Well, different civilizations process reality in wildly different ways. As you can see, Western civilization has historically leaned heavily into an extreme kind of materialism, really focusing on the bodily intellect, worldly reason, and the natural sciences. Eastern civilization, on the flip side, leans heavily into an extreme abstract spirituality through deep meditation, which often neglects the physical body entirely. But then we have the Barzakian alternative, which acts as this ultimate biopunk synthesis. It actively balances both poles. It creates a dynamic interaction where physical, material presence and spiritual humility combine, generating a completely unified human consciousness.
And when these human populations organize themselves into states, they behave exactly like biological organisms. This is a brilliant concept masterfully outlined in Ibn Khaldun's living organism theory. Traditional agrarian states are practically living leviathans. They have semi-permeable borders to protect their insides, a metabolism driven by farming and photosynthesis, gradients of persuasion, and a literal societal genome embedded right into their law books. But here is the crucial part. Ibn Khaldun describes the phoenix of civilization. Because societies metabolize, they inevitably burn out under the heavy, crushing weight of entropy. They fall apart, and then they must be reborn from the ashes, starting that cycle of dynamic growth all over again.
Which brings us to our final section, the summit of consciousness.
So we've looked at the macro level of civilizations, but if we transition down to the profound micro level of the human soul, where does all this dynamic growth ultimately lead us? Salem and Jasasa reached this ultimate realization out there in the cyber desert. It's an ontological inversion of sovereignty. Let me explain what that means. Right now, in this worldly life, our hardware, our physical body, limits our software, the spirit. We're bound by hunger, pain, and strict spatial limits. But in the dynamic summit of the hereafter, this entire script flips. The software starts dictating the hardware. The spirit becomes the absolute foundation, liberating us from those material limitations and allowing for continuous, completely unbroken expansion.
There's a really profound Quranic metaphor that grounds this reality beautifully. Life is like water. Water hardly settles down and never remains static in one state, and nor does life. Just think about your own daily grind for a second. The constant material pursuits we all chase day in and day out. It is incredibly transient. It's continuously flowing. We can't hold on to it any more than we can grasp water in a tight fist. And this beautiful truth reveals exactly why our restless human nature matters so much. We were never meant for static stasis. We are built from the ground up for continuous dynamic movement. So I want to leave you with this. What lies beyond the bounds of physical complexity when the body becomes entirely subject to the spirit? Physical death isn't just some chaotic endpoint, it's a transition. It's a transition into the great existence beyond the tiny box of this worldly life. The Quran captures this ultimate dynamic summit perfectly. In verse 2251, it describes how God checks one set of people by means of another just to prevent the earth from falling into corruption and entropy. It's a continuous dynamic balancing act. And then, verse 1547 describes the ultimate harmony of the hereafter, removing resentment from hearts, sitting as brethren on thrones facing each other. It is the perfect synthesis, an infinite, unceasing growth of consciousness. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and I really hope this reframes how you look at the incredibly dynamic universe within you. See you next time.